by the influential Foreign Policy magazine as one of the 100 leading global thinkers of 2016. So we are going to listen to her wisdom during this presentation. Please join me to invite Lima.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is not really the best time to deliver a speech. It's quite a great honor and pleasure to be among the invited speakers for this annual conference on cultural diplomacy 2016. In the 7 years I've been in public service, I have had various opportunities to speak before groups of multinational audience and international events. First as chairperson of the Philippine Commission on Human Rights, and thereafter as Secretary of the Department of Justice or Minister of Justice. This occasion, though, bears a great and unique significance to me, both professionally and personally. Not only because this is the very first time that I will be delivering a formal speech on global platform as an elected public official, but also because of the current state of the country and of the people I am here to represent. If before I came to offer answers, now for better or for worse, I come with questions and points for self-reflection about what the future holds for my country, the Philippines. To be completely honest, I am representing a country and a people whose true complexity and indefinability I'm only beginning to truly understand. Whereas I used to stand before international stakeholders assuring them that all is well, or at least everything is being done to make sure that all will be well on the human rights front in the Philippines, I myself am one of those who are today looking for similar reassurances. Whereas I used to think that we Filipinos have long learned our lessons about the folly of falling for authoritarian rule under a charismatic and dangerous cult-like leader, I myself am not so sure why we are in this situation once again. 2016 or 2016 will be remembered as a year of, shall we say, interesting turns of events, although interesting seems to be an understatement. This time last year, I had a clear vision of the Republic and of the Filipino people that I was seeking to serve. A people that valued justice and humanity, independence, democracy, and the rule of law, truth, justice, freedom, love, equality, and peace. And our country seemed well on its way to realizing these aspirations and ideals as embodied in the preamble to our Constitution. Never could I have foreseen the extent to which the very phase and values of my country and my people could have changed in just 12 months, nor the disturbing direction we seem to be hurtling towards from here on. In May of this year, 16 million Filipinos elected a self-confessed serial killer as president. The same candidate who, while on the campaign trail, told a rape joke about an Australian missionary who was raped and killed in the city where he was then serving as mayor, cursed the Pope for having caused traffic jams during his papal visit, evaded questions about the source of his alleged undeclared wealth amounting to billions of pesos, and basically promised to employ summary killings as a policy to curtail criminality. In the last 5 months, he has proven through his blood-soaked promise, at least to the extent that by the Philippine National Police's own statistics, we have now recorded a total of more than 6,095 deaths in connection with the Duterte administration's war on drugs, which is turning out to be more of a war on the poor, while big-time drug lords have thus far been mostly allowed to evade justice. He has also allowed the former dictator, Ferdinand Marcos, to be buried as a hero. The same dictator whose 20-year regime, which was as corrupt as it was bloody, from similar acts of summary execution, torture, enforced disappearances, and various other forms of human rights abuses and political oppression, is the very raison d'etre for the drafting of the 1987 Constitution, which sought to ensure that similar abuses and heinousness will never again find space within the annals of Philippine history. In one fell swoop, the current president obscured the rejection of such dictatorial regime by allowing a plunderer and a killer to be given a hero's burial. He has also driven the women's empowerment and gender sensitivity movement in our country several decades back by himself creating a culture of misogyny, wherein female members of the press are catcalled during press conferences, female police officers are touched inappropriately, even the vice president's legs are openly ogled during cabinet meetings, and slut shaming is employed as a form of political reprisal against women who dare criticize him. And I happen to be the #1 victim of that slut shaming. He and his men, preying the people's fears from so-called anticipated reprisals by those involved in the drug trade, or from terrorist attacks, or some other undefined threats that prey upon their feelings of insecurity, are keeping the threat of a declaration of a state of martial law or national emergency and suspension of the writ of habeas corpus perpetually hanging above the Filipinos' heads, thus priming them for malleability for other extreme actions. And even after all of that, what is most disturbing is the way he is shaping the very psyche and identity of the Filipino people. We have gotten to the point where we're trying to convince ourselves that we do not hear what we are hearing, that we do not see what we are seeing, that it's okay for the president to do and say what he does and says because he's just being true to himself, and that's a good thing. That to speak against the president is to stand against the 16 million people who voted for him. In fact, in spite of everything and against all reasonable expectations, our president still enjoys a very good performance rating from the people, according to a latest survey released just days ago. Of course, surveys aren't always accurate, but the absence of a roaring rejection of the occurrence of daily deaths in our streets is in itself quite disturbing. If 6,095 deaths, including deaths of innocent children, in less than 6 months, isn't enough to spark outrage, how many more will it take? Apparently, much, much more, if we go by the proposal to revive the death penalty, which I predict can easily pass in the lower house of the Philippine Congress. Apparently, our choice is be killed in the streets or be killed by public execution. It doesn't matter that we all know that death penalty has never been as successful a deterrent to crime as it is a weapon of political suppression. It doesn't matter that our justice system is far from being perfect to ensure that no innocent lives are taken. All that matters is that macabre mathematics that equates death tolls to accomplishments. That is the true horror of it all. We are fast becoming a nation where killing is seen as a solution to our problems. Not a solution, not the first or the last resort, but the solution. It doesn't even matter that it has been clearly demonstrated that some cops are complicit in the very crimes they're supposed to suppress. Clearly, the only real solution is to give them a carte blanche authority to kill the suspects outright. That is our brand of justice these days. And the true horror is that some of our people will stand up and applaud this reality. So, what does this say about our people, Filipino people? Are we evil that we condone evil to be done in our name? Are we cowards? Or are we simply realists? Maybe it isn't a question of how many are dying, but who are dying. Perhaps the outrage will be greater if it were prominent people who are dying instead of the poor whose lives, by society's measure, perhaps is already forfeit anyway. Perhaps it is simply the old Millian dialogue applied in our times. The strong do as they can, while the weak suffer as they must. Is there room for idealism in our society? Or should the rest of us, who are still hanging on to the values we were raised to aspire to, simply bow to the demands of those who want us to simply blindly support our president? Unity for the sake of unity? Earlier in the year, I would have called this turn of events in our country unexpected, shocking, or maybe even unforeseeable. Of course, that will never happen again. We know better, don't we? Apparently, we don't. Not really. Armed with the benefit of hindsight, I see now that in our preoccupation to realize the idealized version of our nation, we failed to see the vulnerabilities in our notion of nationhood that make those ideals still far out of reach. One of which is the absence of a truly and deeply shared Filipino identity. There is still a huge gap between who we have been thought to think we are and who we truly are. The gaps in income, social status, education, culture, language, beliefs, values, histories, and even geography are too real, too deep, and too long unexplored to allow us to form a true Filipino identity. We forget that before the Spaniards came along, there was no single Filipino nation to speak of. Even after we declared independence from colonial rule, we formed a unitary government that merely adopted the colonial boundaries we inherited. Even our very flag, for instance, I see our flag here. It has only 8 rays, his rays, the yellow rays, to its sun, to symbolize the 8 northern provinces that started the revolution against Spain. Whether we intend it or not, it sends the message that the long-standing resistance to colonial rule in other areas, especially in the South, in Mindanao, for example, do not mean as much. Several weeks ago, for instance, when the Marcos burial became an issue, it turned out to be more divisive than anticipated. While there were people who came out to oppose it, there were also those who were very vocal in their support for it. That was baffling to us. How can we reconcile our political history with this act of honoring the one man who single-handedly brought on the darkest period of our post-colonial history? We thought that perhaps it was a failure on our part to teach history properly and effectively. But now I realize that it may not just be about forgotten histories, but altogether neglected ones. By failing to account for the flip side of history, the experiences of those who remained loyal to the dictator, who never personally suffered during martial law, but saw it as a time of prosperity, thus enabling them to look back to it with nostalgia rather than trauma, we allowed misconceptions and feelings of marginalization to germinate. I say it isn't so much of a problem of the fading of scars, but of a wound that never completely healed in the first place. Peoples and interests were bound to be overlooked if they never took the time to consciously seek, develop, and integrate them into the Filipino identity. That's why we still have indigenous peoples fighting for recognition of their rights. Areas like the Bangsamoro, where the fight for freedom has never waned, and feelings of oppression by the so-called Imperial Manila. That is why, even as people are dying, people are much too accepting of the injustice rather than fighting to correct it. There, I believe, lies the answer as to why authoritarian leaders who excel at manipulation can find the gaps that allow them to sink their claws into our nation and rip us apart from the inside. They have been able to prey on our fears and self-interest in order to divide and conquer us. The harder we try to gloss over these differences or insist that they do not exist, the more weapon we give to the next person who promises to deliver them their validation at whatever cost. They prey on our feelings of marginalization and victimization and offer themselves up as the agents of change and champions of our cause. For as long as we see one another as others, we will never trust that we truly have each other's interests in mind, and we will always look for the person who will fight for us, even if that person employs means that we would otherwise have found unacceptable, such as the current situation in the Philippines today, the daily killings. That, therefore, is a challenge that we Filipinos face in 2017, and the years thereafter. We must find who we are as one people. We must define the identity of the Filipino. To know who we are is to trust who we are. To know our identity is to recognize it in others. To recognize it in others is to feel revulsion when their lives are taken. This is critical to our future, not the least because there are proposals to convert our unitary government to a federal one, among other proposed constitutional amendments. And just like the death penalty, that is something that our national leadership would really want to be achieved. And while there may be good reasons to convert to a federal system of government, I firmly believe and truly do fear that doing it now, under the circumstances when we are more fragmented than truly united, there is a real danger that it would create greater friction among our people without the hope of a common identity or common interests to hold us together. I believe that it all starts with cultivating a culture of listening, one that is oriented towards conversations that lead to true understanding, not just towards unproductive reactions and divisive debates, and definitely not through fake news, which seem to proliferate in our country today. Just yesterday, they disseminated this fake news about me being thrown out of this conference because of my anti-Duterte rhetorics. It's all over our local social media. True diplomacy, if you will, employed not between two states, but person to person. And when I go back to my country in a few days, I know that there are those who until now will seek to cast me as the enemy because I dare question the abuses of power that I see, and I dare object to the rampant killings taking place in our streets. But I shall take with me the knowledge that my one and only sin, so to speak, is having stepped out of the cave and seen the world outside, especially through the eyes and wisdom of all of you who have graced this year's conference. Having done so, I go back home conscious of my duty to help the prisoners still trapped in the cave, to make them see the chains that bind them for what they are, to help them free themselves of those chains, and to finally step outside the cave and see the beauty, freedom, and opportunities that the real world has to offer. For a person who lives a hard, fulfilling life outside the cave is still more fortunate than the prisoner who wastes his life chained inside, believing in the tricks of light and shadows, while waiting in line for their turn under the butcher's knife. As I come to the close of my humble contribution to this conference, I would make clear that I am not an academic, I am not an expert, I am but a public servant and a human rights advocate who herself has felt the claws of political persecution in retaliation for standing up against the most powerful official in our country. At a time and under circumstances when our very identity and moral values as a people is in question, and when I myself do not know what the future holds for me and other human rights defenders in our country, I lament that I cannot offer categorical answers or endorsements for completely foolproof and dictator-proof practices to promote and uphold human rights, except perhaps to, first and foremost, recognize that it is a never-ending process that requires constant vigilance. While we open our hearts and minds to different views, experiences, fears, and aspirations, we must hold on to our fearless and uncompromising tenacity, never to surrender our humanity. For our humanity is the one thing that can ever truly bind us, the basis for trust, the basis for unity, the very survival of our species. Thank you for your attention.
Now, you may not characterize as an academician, but we have noticed that you are a very strong supporter of human rights, and if you don't mind, we are going to turn to the audience now, and if they have questions, you may wish to comment on this question, or they may have comments, and you will give a listen to these comments altogether.
Here in the front, the first one.
Thank you very much. My name is Stefan Helbing. I'm deaf and I'm a wheelchair user. Thank you very much for your impressive speech. I didn't know that the situation in the Philippines is that critical at the moment. And regarding to the women's rights, I think it's so important to have equality of women and men, and for example in the politics. And I think with women we will have more peace all over the world, and we have to engage them. And I hope you all the best in your country, and do all the best, and thanks for your engagement.
Thank you. Just a little comment also on that. You know, our country is proud of the fact that we are actually number 7 as the most gender equal nation based on the international ranking, and we're supposed to be number 1 in the entire Asia Pacific as the most gender equal nation. But those milestones that we have achieved in the name of gender equality are now put at risk because we have a misogynistic president, you know, who looks down at women and resorts to slut shaming and resorts to insulting women, and that's very unfortunate in our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other question or comment? You introduce yourself first.
Hello, my name is Linda. I'm a student here at ISB. You talked about lost identities in the Philippines, or forgotten histories. You have a very strong nation branding campaign in the Philippines, more fun in the Philippines, it makes me worry that, I mean, what is the world seeing from the nation running campaign? Is it different from what the identity is? What is being communicated? I mean, if I'm a tourist and I want to come to the Philippines and the nation branding campaign is so strong and so attractive, and yet this is a country that has lost identity, lost history, then what are you selling?
Well, I still would want to sell our people as a very peace-loving country, because it is a Catholic-dominated country. It's the only Catholic country actually in Asia, and we are peace-loving. As I said, we are supposed to be God-fearing, but the way things are happening in our country now, many people are getting confused. Now we have a leader, a strong leader, with such a personality that is now like a cult-like leader, with many followers, almost blinded by his strength, by his rhetorics, and then by his promise of trying to save the country from criminality, particularly from the drug menace. But well, as I mentioned in my discourse, there's little aversion of the daily killings that's happening. As we speak, there are killings happening in our country every night. On an average of 20 to 30 people are being killed. These are suspected small-time drug dealers, small-time drug users, mostly poor from the slum communities. They are being summarily executed, but while I suspect that I see and know to be death squads and working hand in hand with a regular police force. So that's not the Philippines that we know. That's not the Filipinos that we know and that the rest of the world know. We are supposed to be opposed to this kind of atmosphere, but there is an atmosphere, a climate of fear and impunity pervading our society. So our identity as a Filipino is actually on the line and in question. Thank you.
Thank you. To take one more question, if there is any. One more last question, if there is.
There is one. What is it that we can do to support your fight back vote? Can we sign a petition or anything the like, either on the initiative of ICD or in another way?
Thank you for that question. I'm always asked in any forum that I attend about that. Well, first of all, continue monitoring the developments in our country, and especially we would want also your support for certain moves from the UN. Although it's unfortunate that while there has been an invitation from our government to the UN Special Rapporteur on summary executions and extrajudicial killings, but because of certain unreasonable conditions imposed by our government, then it becomes uncertain whether there would in fact be a visit from the UN Special Rapporteur on summary execution. But all is not lost, because we know that, and we see that the ICC Special Prosecutor is interested and has been monitoring the developments for possible accountability of the President and his men for acts against, for crime against humanity because of the mass murders. So stepping up the discussion, the conversation about the Philippine situation, and for the various international organizations to really speak about the true state of our country would help a lot. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Please join me to thank once more Senator Lima for the hearing.
Senator, we in the past have been allowing only 2 questions per speaker, so in that sense, I want to try to be just to the other speakers who are here. And I'm pleased now to say a few words of introductions about our next speaker, who I had the pleasure to get to know already, I think, 5-6 years ago for the first time. When we first got to know Mr. Intes Valderas, he was actually the Minister of Culture for his